speaker. Well, no, well, first it will be more logical because then Maura, you can take it away. The referee who's not on board yet is Tanja Sluiter. She's the head of ethics, risk and compliance for the Netherlands for Novartis, a pharmaceutical company. And she holds a master's degree in biomedical sciences with an executive master in compliance and integrity management. And she's now already in Novartis since 2006. First as a medical advisor, now leading this ethics, risk and compliance department. So it's very interesting. She has a lot of experience in collaboration, also from the industry, and that's also one of the topics that's for today. And therefore, I would like to introduce our speaker of today for this lunch, and that's my dear colleague Maura Hiney. She's from the Health Research Board in Ireland, and she also PhD in molecular diagnostics epizoontology. I didn't know that because she's not so much involved in that field anymore, if I am sure. It's not the top, and it's definitely not the topic of today. She headed the research support services at the University of Galway from 2000 to 2007. And there she already started establishing an ethics committee and requiring policy and guidelines on good research practices. And after that, there's one person who mute himself. Jonas, can you mute yourself? Yeah. And after that, she chairs numerous working groups and networks, among them, for example, NRIN, where she's the vice chair. She is the lead of the ALIA Permanent Working Group on Science and Ethics, and coordinated the revision of the ALIA Code in 2017. And now is also she's working on another revision. And she has been advised on several EU-funded projects, and is also a partner in the Subsidiary project. And that's also one of the reasons that I know Maura quite well, because we collaborate together there. And that's also exactly the topic of today, where we're going to talk about the framework that ensures inclusion in collaborative research, both at universities, but also in the relation to universities and industry. Please welcome her, and thank you for being here, Maura. The floor is yours, but without saying that, please, if you have any questions or remarks, please put them in the chat. And we will, the first 20 minutes, it's always like this, the first 20 minutes, it is for the presentation for Maura, then 10 minutes is for the referee, and after that we have an open discussion about the topic of today. Maura, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yuri. That was a very fulsome introduction altogether, and you're right, it's collaboration has been much on our mind over the last few years in the National Research Integrity Forum here in Ireland, because as we've looked at various cases, etc., it's become fairly clear to us that a lot of the disputes that have arisen have been because people hadn't really agreed at the very beginning of their collaborations how they were going to deal with things. So that was the impetus for this. So I'm just going to very quickly look at the scale and the why is a collaboration, some of the common misconduct issues, and maybe using retraction as an indicator of misconduct and how frequent it is, and then looking at how collaborations fare as part of misconduct cases. I'll give you a little story of the journey we had towards the collaboration framework, and then look at the various elements that we agreed to include in the framework. So in terms of the scale of international collaboration, well, WHO and colleagues in 2020 did a really interesting study where they mapped international collaborations generally. And as you can see from the red line there, they're going up all the time. But they also then looked at industry collaborative papers. And, while there's a small drop off, it's still a fairly significant part of the research landscape. I suppose the reasons why people collaborate, and I'll come back to that a little bit more later, but Essers and his colleagues also in 2020 said that really, collaborations networks are critical for research collaborations, and networks are critical for research. And he showed that the number of authors that are involved in publications has actually been rising steadily. I mean, you can see there are 600 author papers kicking around. So it's kind of important that everybody is in agreement in the beginning about how things should happen. So, why do people collaborate? Well, there was a very interesting study done there recently, in 2017, by the Royal Society, the British Academy, and the Royal Academy of Engineering, and the Academy of Medical Sciences in the UK. The original impetus for this study was actually to look at travel. Why do academics travel? Which seems like a strange reason to do it, but they were just interested in, because they were looking at things like travel budgets, and they were probably thinking about maybe they should reduce travel budgets. So they tried to get under the skin of this. And what they found from their study, they talked to 1,286 fellows and grant holders, that international and collaboration and mobility are seen as absolutely integral to the life of an active researcher. And this was across all disciplines and across all career stages of research. And 95% of the people that they talked to at that time had at least one collaboration in the last 5 years. So it's really critical. And then they said, well, why are you collaborating? Well, I mean, a lot of them obviously want to contribute. They feel they have an expertise and they can contribute to that kind of broader research landscape. They want to maintain those links. They also want to access expertise, though, and that's really important because, especially in somewhere like Ireland, it's a small country, we cannot possibly have kind of world-class expertise in every single area. So collaboration would be really, really important for us. And of course, so many research questions are bigger than one country or bigger than one research group, and they need multidisciplinarity and they need international collaboration to actually tackle them. A lot of people, like working, they meet somebody that they've maybe worked in a collaboration before on, they like working with them. And they may also want to get access to, specific technical skills or equipment and so on and so forth. So basically, there are lots and lots of really good reasons as to why people might collaborate. So the question then is, well, if international collaboration is so beneficial, what is the problem we're trying to solve here with this collaboration framework? Okay, so let's talk about misconduct then and some of the common misconduct issues. And there was a really nice paper done by Anna Armand and colleagues, published in 2021, where they looked at research ethics and research integrity cases and classified why, what was the problem in each of those cases, what were the misconducts in each of those cases. And what they found that, unfortunately, while there were lots of reasons why a misconduct case has arisen, a lot of them are in the FFP, the serious misconduct category of plagiarism, fabrication, and falsification. So, that's quite worrying, actually, if you think about it, because, I mean, you'd hope that it's kind of things like, peer review misconduct or whatever, just sloppy science, I guess, if you like. But no, a lot of it is actually to do with FFP. So if we take retraction of peer-reviewed articles as some sort of an indicator of misconduct, there's been some pretty interesting studies. I mean, sorry, no, I'm losing my page here somewhere along the line. So in 2012, Fang and colleagues found that, misconduct was actually why a lot of papers were retracted. Now, actually, I think that has improved since then, in that more people are now willing to retract because they have found errors in their papers. So that's good news. But in the same year then, there was a very comprehensive study done of retracted articles from the scholarly literature by Greason and Zhang. And what they found was that, again, unfortunately, that fraudulent, fabricated data, plagiarism, and falsification actually accounted for quite a lot of the retracted papers, but so did things like publication misconduct of various stripes. So, you know, there were 3,200 articles retracted in 2021. So obviously, you know, if you're looking at the graph on the left and thinking about those 3,200 articles, there's an awful lot of them that are actually fabricating, falsifying, or plagiarizing their papers, or they're putting in duplicate figures, they're doing duplicate publications, and so on. So, you know, we do have a problem here. We definitely do have a problem. But getting back to Anna Armand and her colleagues, they tried to classify the domains in which retraction and misconduct was happening in the cases that they looked at. And they came up with a long list of, you know, where there were problems. So, you know, if you start at the top there, selective data, modifying data, adding fabricated data, etc., etc. But what I think is interesting in this is when you look at the domains, a lot of them are actually in the domain of collaboration. But of course, the thing is, even if they're not specifically seen as part of collaboration, everything there is something that people who collaborate in a project will have done. And one of the difficulties here as well is that, especially if you're collaborating with industry, people have different goals. And there was a really nice little paper done out of the University of Tartu by Sipo and Lils, and they looked at the kind of the different goals that a university would have and that industry would have, and then how they might cooperate. So obviously for a university, it's about education, it's about research, it's about serving society. But for industry, it's about entrepreneurship, it's about innovation, developing products and services, and ultimately it's about turnover and profit. So where those two can come together, there are, you know, real benefits. There's lifelong learning for the people in both industry and the university. There's academic and student mobility. There's the opportunity for universities to commercialize their research outputs and to collaborate with industry in the development of research outputs. There's the, you know, there's the whole idea of entrepreneurship, and of course universities are quite keen on entrepreneurship now, and a lot of them will have incubator units and so on and so forth. And also there is learning across both universities and industry around research governance. So, as I say, we've had a little bit of a journey to the development of this collaboration framework that started back in 2015 when we published a first policy, if you like, for Ireland, a national policy statement on ensuring research integrity in Ireland. And that was based on the old European Code of Conduct that had been developed jointly by the European Science Foundation and an ALEA. And out of that came the National Research Integrity Forum. So that's been a really key mover and shaker in Ireland. But of course, then in 2017, I and colleagues in ALEA had the nerve to go and revise the European Code of Conduct and to make it a lot shorter and snappier and so on and so forth. So now our original ensuring research integrity in Ireland policy was out of date. So we had to revise it. And that was fine, and we did, and we very much referenced the 2017 code. But as I say, we also were starting to notice from looking at misconduct cases in Ireland, the collaboration underpinned quite a lot of them. So we developed and just published in January of this year, a framework for collaborative, sort of, this is not replacing collaborative agreements that talk about IP, et cetera, but it's trying to build, hardwire research integrity considerations into collaboration agreements. So what does it look like? Well, obviously, we took the principles of the European Code of Conduct about reliability, honesty, respect, and accountability, and they sort of follow, if you like, the passage of research. So it's about sort of ensuring that the research is designed well, that the proper methodologies are applied, that the analysis is correct, that they're using the right stats, and that they're using the resources most efficiently, but then also being honest about that, and also being honest about how you undertake the research, etc. Being respectful of your colleagues, and if you're using human or animal subjects, being very much respectful of those, but also of the ecosystem, environments, culture, depending on the discipline you're working in, and then ultimately being accountable for your research. So, you know, no surprises there. So what we tried to do then was look at sort of different areas. So we made some general recommendations first and foremost. And the most important one, I think, was about the roles and responsibilities. Because if you don't understand what those are at the beginning of the collaboration, you're in big trouble down the road. You've got to kind of agree what the roles and responsibilities are for upholding research integrity principles, that it's the responsibility of everybody in the research collaboration, so that people can't just say, oh, that's not my problem. But it's also very important to take into account kind of customary practices and assumptions. And that is particularly important when you're looking at multidisciplinary collaborations. So there will be different practices, customary practices, assumptions, for example, about, you know, the order of authors in a paper. So you've got to agree at the beginning and try and facilitate as much as possible those different research practices across disciplines and cultures. Then there is, of course, the most important one early, the protection of good research practices. And what we looked there again, and this sort of mirrors the European Code of Conduct around governance. So having good governance arrangements in place that run alongside your standard collaboration agreements, and also having some dispute mechanisms in place. Oh God, please put dispute mechanisms in place, because that's where a lot of the pain comes from. But also about compliance. Well, whose laws are we going to comply with? What codes are we going to comply with? What policies are we going to comply with? Understanding what they are, what the difference between them is, and then agreeing which ones will actually apply to that particular collaboration. And then obviously, if something does go pear-shaped somewhere along the line, you really have to agree at the very beginning about how you're going to handle that, who's going to handle it, under what laws, etc., etc. So transparency, well, I mean, that's a really important, you know, especially for things like open access, etc. I mean, it is the whole movement behind open science. But, you know, especially if you're working with industry, transparency can be a tricky one to negotiate, because on the one hand, you want to make all of your publications available in an open access format. You want to make the data available in an open access format. And that will not always suit, for example, an industry partner. So you really have to try and think about how can we be as transparent as possible, while also taking into account the needs of an industry partner in a collaboration. And then, and this is the one, okay, this is where it really hits the fan, as they say in Ireland, you know, around dissemination, communication, and exploitation. This is where most of the rows happen. So, authorship and acknowledgements. What constitutes authorship? At what point do you simply get acknowledged? What's the order of the authors, etc., etc. You've got to agree that at the beginning, but it also has to be underpinned by a kind of a principle of fair recognition for the contribution of all authors. But really, really important that that's agreed at the beginning to stop the rows later on. Inventorship, again, and this isn't just with industry, but if it's a technology-driven project, it's really important to agree, what constitutes inventorship, how that's going to be established, how it's going to be recognized, and how it's going to be communicated. And then the whole issue of open research. I mean, you know, open research is the way of the future. It's unavoidable. It's going to happen in collaborations. And so it is really important to agree at the outset what open research practices you're going to use in your collaboration, and especially if you're in industry. So I suppose the message here is that everybody benefits from a strong research integrity base. And that little picture there on the right left of your screen was a little booklet that I and some colleagues developed when I was chairing the Science Europe working group on research integrity. Because at the very beginning, we realized, and it was something that people in the group said to us, you know, it'd be really handy if we had a couple of snappy points that we could show to the rector of our university or the dean of our faculty or our colleagues to say why it is important to ensure research integrity. So, I mean, obviously, it safeguards the foundations of science and scholarship, in particular the research record. And, you know, really importantly, it maintains public confidence in science and in researchers and in research evidence. And I mean, during the pandemic, you could see how important it was that people were confident about the research evidence that was being used to make policies that directly impacted their lives. But also, a lot of funding is public funding. So, you know, if the public don't believe scientists, if they think that they're, you know, just not trustworthy, they can make that displeasure known through their elected representatives, who are the people who make the decisions about how much funding actually goes into public science. So it's really important that you've got the public on board and trusting you. So that's what I mean by continued investment in research. It protects the reputation, obviously, on the careers of researchers. They don't want to be involved. I mean, there's lots of bad things that can happen if you're associated with a research misconduct case, even if you're an innocent bystander. There's an awful lot of collateral damage for researchers if they're associated with research misconduct. There's also collateral damage, though, for their departments, their disciplines, for the amount of funding that flows into an area, for the citation rates for that area, and so on. So it's really important to protect the reputation. And of course, if you're working in the medical field, it's very important to protect the adverse impacts that could arise for patients and the public. And as a government, you want to promote economic advancement. You need to believe in the results that are being given to you to underpin innovation, and industry also needs to believe those as well. And I mean, very importantly, and this is where the DORA principles, the Hong Kong principles, etc., come in, is that you really want to avoid waste in research, be that funding of research that is subsequently fabricated, falsified, and papers have to be retracted, projects have to be pulled, or, you know, and I'm afraid the sort of the data around the amount of waste in research, because it was just purely badly designed, is quite shocking. So you really, really want to avoid that if you can. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm really happy to take questions, and I will stop sharing my screen now.